If we talk in economic terms, political terms would be quite different. In at least the last 2 decades, Peru has become a benchmark for Latin American countries. With high economic growth rates and a lot of commercial openness, Peru has experienced a decrease in poverty and has seen the middle class grow throughout the country in recent years. However, hold on a second, because this virtuous cycle of economic prosperity, it could be reaching its end. And not only that, through all these years, although things have gone reasonably well, some problems haven't been solved at all. For example, Peru's huge dependence on raw material, lack of diversification, and inability to join global production chains. And all of this leads us to some questions. Will Peru be able to overcome these issues and emulate the Asian tigers? Can the country join the 4th Industrial Revolution? And why on earth haven't they yet managed to overcome their dependence on raw materials? Well, we're going to try and answer these questions in today's video. But first, we need to take a look at the causes of Peru's takeoff.
The foundations of the Peruvian push.
So what has driven Peru's success in the last 25 years? This is a very important question for Peru, for the other Latin American countries, and for practically anyone who wants to see their own country escape poverty. Well, to answer this question, we need to highlight 2 major points. The first is orthodoxy and macroeconomic stability, and no, don't worry, it's not boring at all. See, one of the keys to Peru's growth is that its various governments have opted for continuity.
No habrá segunda vuelta. El presidente de la República ha sido reelecto.
No estoy dispuesto a darle la espalda a mi país ni a la democracia.
This means that the country's political leaders have had political differences. Yep, just like everyone else, it's inevitable and good, but they also understand that there was a development model, a country model that they couldn't touch. Alberto Fujimori, Alejandro Toledo, Alan Garcia, in his second term of course, Ollanta Humala, Pedro Pablo Kaczynski, and now Martin Vizcarra. 6 presidents with different political approaches, but basically the same economic model. It reminds me of the Lord of the Rings, but instead of the ring, there's an economic model, one model to rule them all. The fact is that in the last 25 years, Peru has had its deficits and public debt under control, and they have respected the central bank's independence and avoided the temptation to run the bill printing machine, and they've generally prompted investment. For example, let's take a look at the evolution of foreign investments in the country. See, between 1980 and 1994, it barely doubled, but between 1994 and 2005, it multiplied by 4, and between 2005 and today, it's multiplied by almost 7. That is to say, foreign investment has grown more and more in less time. All that, folks, has caused Peru's growth rates to average at almost 6% per year for more than 15 years. Check this out.
At an APEC meeting, they asked me what I thought would happen to the Peruvian economy and the international crisis. And I said that the only thing I was sure of was that the country that was going to grow the most this year was Peru. Luis Alberto Moreno, president of the Inter-American Development Bank.
Of course, economic growth ends up favoring almost everyone in one way or another. You don't have to have a Nobel Prize in economics to understand that one. In Peru, in less than 15 years, a short period of time, the purchasing power per capita almost doubled and poverty fell by 30 percentage points. But percentages are sometimes hard to understand. To really understand the importance of such a reduction in poverty, we should talk about people. 7 million Peruvians left poverty in the last 15 years thanks to the country's economic growth. But, along with stability and macroeconomic continuity, the country's other strategic commitment has been opening up to foreign investment.
De Shanghai a Chancay.
It began in the 90s, continued through the turn of the century, and it remains today. Today, Peru has free trade agreements with no less than the three major economic zones: the United States, China, and the European Union. It's also part of the Pacific Alliance, and in general, its foreign policy is very much aimed at achieving new trade agreements. And all this, of course, it certainly has its consequences. Exports have increased from $3 billion in 1990 to more than $52 billion today. In other words, they've multiplied by 17. But hold on a second, let's not ring the bells of success just yet. These results, they have been fantastic, that's certainly true, but now the model, it seems just a bit exhausted. And yes, you know we love talking about good things, and of course Peru has many good things going for it, but guys, like with Enron, Blockbuster, and Nokia, if we don't look at the other side, things don't end well. Indeed, often they will just hit you right in the face. So let's have a look at the main problems that are preventing this country from emulating the tigers and the dragons of the Asian continent.
El pueblo exige cierre en el Congreso.
The Peru that breaks.
Peru hasn't escaped poverty yet. Despite its almost 25 years of uninterrupted growth, the country still has a lot of poverty. Worst of all, despite this growth, in recent years the Peruvian economy has been like a balloon with an air leak that could get a lot bigger. Allow me to explain. Peru continues to grow, but its slowdown is becoming more than evident. The country is growing less, and confidence among businessmen has decreased a lot. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is that the biggest changes, they're slow to arrive, much slower than expected. As we've already mentioned, there's still a lot of poverty in the country, and in spite of all the growth, it still doesn't have a productive, diversified, and modern economy. Essentially, Peru continues to depend on raw materials, and now if its growth slows down, the question is, well, how much longer is it going to take for things to change? We don't know, but what we can try to do is explain why it's so hard to make changes in this country. Well, here are some ideas.
Póngale usted un número a su primer gobierno.
Qué desgraciado es usted. Yo me jalaría.
Se jala.
Se jala. ¿Y qué quiere que le diga?
Si usted se jala a sí mismo como presidente, ¿por qué debemos votar entonces ahora por usted?
Yo a mi hijo le dije, ¿en qué año descubrió Cristóbal Colón América? No sabe.
The first problem, we're probably all going to agree on this one, is that it's political and it's got to do with corruption. Have you heard about the Odebrecht case? Well, that's just the tip of the iceberg. The deal here is so dodgy that at least 5 of the country's latest presidents are suspected of being involved in cases of corruption. 3 are in jail: Fujimori, Humala, and Kaczynski. And then there's Alan Garcia, and I'm sure you already know his tragic and unfortunate end.
Alan Garcia, former Peru president, dies after shooting himself before arrest.
But this isn't the only political mess. In Peru, parties get on so badly and politics is so polarized and fragmented that agreements are as difficult to reach as a presidential candidacy composed of Mauricio Macri and Cristina Fernández de Kirchner. Well, actually, now that we think about that one, it wouldn't be so hard to see. The fact is that, of course, this economic polarization has stagnated the de facto economic reforms agenda. Since the international crisis, the country has barely made any significant structural reforms. But some claim that the government and the Congress's lack of productivity had a positive effect back in the day. The economic reforms of the 90s remained in place because of how little the political class could get done. That is to say, this immobilism prevented politicians from changing the country's economic course, leading to the aforementioned stability. But of course, the problem is that time passes and eventually changes are required. But that's not all. In the end, between their corruption and their inability to reach agreements, Peruvian politicians have turned Peru into the Latin American country with the least confidence in their political organizations. In other words, Peruvians would trust Vito Corleone or Darth Vader more than they would their own politicians. The second problem is that the apparently good performance of the country's economy has covered, hidden, and camouflaged other issues which haven't progressed well. One of them is productivity, which hasn't only not improved, but since as far back as 1975, it's actually progressed negatively. Yep, you heard that right, progressed negatively, it's a thing.
In the long term, the net result shows a secular stagnation in Peru's productivity. This is the main cause of its lack of convergence of per capita income with that of more advanced economies. Marta Ruiz Arranz, IDB advisor.
Now, why is this important? Well, folks, to look at it another way, with data in hand, this means that a single American worker is as productive as 5 Peruvian workers. And, of course, this can't be. 70 years ago, this figure wasn't 5, but 3. An American worker was 3 times more productive than a Peruvian worker. Today, though, he or she is 5 times more productive. Mind you, this doesn't mean Peruvians work less, but that the jobs created in the country have a very low added value, which generates very little. And that, of course, is due to structural problems such as the inability to attract high added value investment, a lack of competition, a feeling of legal insecurity, a lack of entrepreneurship, infrastructure problems, which are a true mess, etc., etc., etc. Surprised? Well, you shouldn't be. In fact, it isn't the only factor that has gotten worse. This is how Peru has evolved in the World Competitiveness Ranking. And this is important because one of the secrets of the Asian economy is that they began by specializing in activities with little added value. That is, so we can understand this better, they competed with low wages. But at the same time, they always tried to improve their level of competitiveness. And as you can see, this simply hasn't happened in Peru. This explains why traditional exports, the usual ones, metals, oils, fish meal, represent more than 70% of all Peruvian exports. For example, one of the areas in which we can see the results of this sluggishness is in education, an essential pillar for a country's modernization. Well, after 25 years of strong economic growth, the Peruvian education system continues to have more holes than a wedge of Swiss cheese. According to the IDB, the Inter-American Development Bank, only 30% of all educational infrastructure can be considered adequate. Anyway, these are the main problems that the country faces. But just hold on a second, because Peru has done many things well in recent years, and we can't end the video on such a negative note. So,
Peru progressing.
Despite their problems, Peru has had one of the best economic performances in Latin America in the last 3 decades. As we saw earlier, poverty levels dropped at full speed, and, well, that's very good news. Also, between 2011 and 2017, the middle class went from 9,847,000 people to almost 13.5 million. This is a growth amount of 40% in just 5 years. And although it has slowed down, the country is still the fastest growing member of the Pacific Alliance. Anyway, with this video, we wanted to explain why Peru is having a harder time than expected in making the big leap. But now it's your turn. Do you think Peru will finally manage to emulate the success of the Asian dragons? Well, leave your answer in the comments below and in this survey, and I really hope you enjoyed this video. Please do hit that like button if you did, and don't forget to subscribe for brand new videos. Also, don't forget to check out our friends at the Reconsider Media podcast. They provided the vocals in this episode that were not mine. Also, this channel is possible because of Patreons and our patrons on that platform. Please do consider joining them and supporting our mission of providing independent political coverage. And as always, I'll see you in the next video.
El pueblo exige cierre en el Congreso.
No estoy dispuesto a darle la espalda a mi país ni a la democracia.
Yo me jalaría.
Se jala.
Se jala. ¿Y qué quiere que le diga?
Si usted se jala a sí mismo como presidente, ¿por qué debemos votar entonces ahora por usted?